Hello, this is my video for the COVID-19 ghosts of past, present, future. Um, I'm turning this all in as one assignment rather than three because it took quite a bit of time to set this all up and get it all working the way I wanted it to. Um, Initially it was going to be a documentary, but there was no way that would be possible with our current situation. I can't, it's hard to have a documentary when you can't go out and interview people. So I just want to talk about my experience with this and reflect on the past and what I sort of relate this to, and talk about what I hope the future is like. So I'll start with what I've been up to. Um, my stepdad owns a land surveying company, and because of that, we have people that work in close proximity to us for most days. And my brother is running a crew of 3 people. One of the people on that crew has been sick recently, and he thought he had the flu, so he went to urgent care because it wasn't getting any better and got tested um, for to see what was making him sick. They would not test him for the coronavirus because they didn't see him as enough of a risk for it, so they tested him for the flu. And he tested negative for the flu, so we thought that meant that he did not have coronavirus. We thought that if you would, because they're testing for the flu instead of coronavirus, we thought that if you did not test positive for the flu, then you wouldn't test positive for corona. I looked into that a little more and found out that that was wrong. So we were all kind of trapped in the house waiting to see what happened. And so we got, he wasn't getting better. He was actually getting worse. He was short of breath and stuff like that. He had many symptoms of the virus. So he went back and got tested again, this time for coronavirus. And we had to stay inside. Nobody could go anywhere for about a week, not to pick up groceries or anything because we might have been exposed to it and we didn't want to spread it. So after, they said it'd be 3 to 7 days for results. After 7 days, we finally got back, and it said that he is very unlikely that he had the coronavirus. This is the actual doctor's note. That's a joke. That's not the actual doctor's note. This is the doctor's note. That's another joke. I don't actually have the doctor's note. So, my great-grandma, about a month ago, went to the hospital for pneumonia. She gets it fairly often, and she's in and out of the hospital probably 3 times a year. But this time it was during the pandemic, and that was hard not being able to be there. This was a pretty bad case of pneumonia, so a lot of the time she was unconscious. They put her under and put her on a ventilator, which was difficult because nobody was there to make sure they were doing the right thing. Not that we don't trust the doctor, but my grandma, or my great-grandma, is Catholic, and she does not believe in life support. She thinks that if it's her time, then God will take her. And being on the ventilator was sort of a difficult spot for our family because there was differing opinions throughout of whether she should or shouldn't be on it. After about 4 days of that, she finally just overnight got better, and almost immediate recovery. Within a couple of hours, she was just better, and she was awake and joking and talking about how she misses her dogs and stuff. Then she came home to my aunt's house, was where she lives, and we all decided that uh, we would go see her and stuff. So I stayed for about a week, and then on Easter Sunday, she was out in the front yard in her wheelchair. We have a little path that goes from the front door to the gate, and on one side of it, it's kind of there's almost a drop off of about 6 inches, and she was out there with my aunt, but my aunt went to go grab a bottle of water for her because she was thirsty. So when my aunt went to go get the bottle of water, um, she was trying to get her dog to come to her, and she lost control of the wheelchair and uh, started rolling, and she fell off of that drop off. Um, and it was chaotic. Everybody was running around trying to make sure she was okay. We got her up back in her wheelchair, and before we had even got up the path to the porch, her eye was swollen. The entire bottom of it right here was swollen up, like she was a boxer that just got socked in the face. And then we got her inside into her room, and then her upper eyelid started swelling as well. And so we decided that we have to take her to the hospital. When they got to the hospital, she was there for another 3 days, and they put a metal plate into her eye socket, which was broken. And now she's back home. They did an emergency surgery on her eye, which is she's 81, so surgery is never good. But she pulled through that fine, and she's back at home now. And she's healing. She hasn't regained vision in that eye yet, and it's been about 3 weeks since then. Her being so fragile sparked another argument in the family, and we all decided that she needs to have someone with her at all times to make sure she doesn't hurt herself. We all have shifts now. We take 24-hour shifts, spending the day with her and helping my grandma take care of her. So that's sort of what I've been doing. That's been taking up a lot of my time. So being around them so often with all the situations brought us a lot closer. But that's the only place I've been able to go during the quarantine. So I don't get to see my other side of the family, my dad's side. We all are trying to be there for each other, but I live in Godley. My uncle and his kids live in Joshua, and my grandma lives in Arlington. And I haven't seen her since December, so almost 6 months. And that's very difficult because I grew up living at my dad's, and because he worked a lot, I almost all the time was at my grandmother's house. So it's hard not being able to see her, because even when I moved out here to Godley, I've still been going in every weekend and seeing her and seeing my dad. But it's hard not seeing family, especially since it's so soon after my dad passing. Because for obvious reasons, my grandmother took it the hardest out of anyone. It's hard not to be there for her and to be there for each other. It feels like this whole virus feels like a barrier between us. It's very difficult. It's very difficult having to be apart at a time like this. But that's sort of the big things I've been doing. I dyed my hair purple. You probably can't tell in this lighting, but My hair is dark purple now, and that's pretty much all I've been up to. So now I'm going to go through some of the questions that were specifically for the documentary. So I have selected a few of the categories for the project to that way this still is an assignment rather than me rambling for an hour. Hopefully it's not that long. So I'm just going to go through some of the list of different things. When you began school 13 years ago, what did you think your final semester would look like? And I chose that to mean how it's different now. So it's hard not seeing my friends, which doesn't just mean my peers, but it also means my teachers. I miss a lot of you guys. It's hard not seeing you guys as well. And I wanted to just let you know that you're not the only one that is missing being at school, which is interesting because I'm sort of not a model student, not someone that would typically like school. It's definitely not how I expected it to go. And so I hope we still have some sort of prom, because that was a big thing to me. I had a lot of ideas of what I wanted to do, because I'm kind of eccentric, and I wanted to sort of make a statement with that. So I hope we still do that. Even if it's not a school-sponsored event, maybe it'll be an unofficial one, just more like a class reunion after all this is over. That'll give me a chance to see my friends again and to reconnect with a lot of people that I've lost contact with, because I don't talk to very many people outside of my closest friends, because I'm kind of a recluse. It's just sort of the way I was raised, I guess. I'm more comfortable in my own space than I am out in the world anyway, so this whole quarantine hasn't been the worst thing in the world for me, because I wouldn't be out doing much anyways, but it's still pretty difficult being away from that routine that I was in of seeing everyone every day. Another question on the past section of the project. Discuss another time in the past where everyday life changed due to uncontrollable circumstances. I wanted to talk about, I used to live with my dad before freshman year. I lived with him my entire life. And I want to talk about how I decided to change that, and sort of what that was like. And I'm going to go into kind of a lot of detail, and it's not super easy to talk about, so I might be kind of all over the place. My parents have been divorced for my entire life, and so I've always been back and forth between houses. I always went to my mom's house on the weekends, and I was with my dad all week and the first weekend of every month. That's just how life always was for me. I don't think that them getting a divorce was a negative thing for me. I think it was a good thing that I got to see them separately, because I got closer to them as people rather than being close to them as a couple. I got to know them more as individuals. I would sort of see my older brother Nathan growing up through Godly and talking about how close of a community it was and how friendly he was and how he knew everyone. And it was very everyone sort of cared about each other and had each other's back, which was strange to me coming from a bigger school. My middle school was just 7th and 8th grade, and we had over 1,000 students. So there was always a lot of people that I didn't know at my other school, and so I only had a couple of friends that I was really close with, and then everyone else was sort of just in the sea of faces, which is different than it is at Godly. But I knew before I had made the decision to move that it would be different. It would be very different for me to have to adjust to that new way of being in school. And so that was sort of a thing pushing me to stay in Arlington. My dad has always struggled with being an alcoholic, and that our relationship suffered from that. In 7th or 8th grade, where I started sort of becoming my own person and developing my own ideas and deciding who I was going to be, around that time I was a lot closer to my mom than I was my dad. So that was sort of a pull towards Godly, but it wasn't enough to make that change until late in 7th grade, I had started to identify as transgender. And I kept that secret for about a year. And then I decided to tell my dad. And my dad had always, in the past, been very supportive of anything that I was thinking, or I'd always been able to talk to him about thoughts that I had that were not necessarily normal. But when I told him that, it was difficult for him to wrap his head around it. My dad has always, I was an only child. I was my dad's only child, I should say. And he loved me more than life itself. He was always, everything he did was for me. But when I told him that I was transgender, I believe his exact words were, "That's not what a father wants for his son." And that was hard to hear that. So around that time, I didn't have a lot of friends in school. I wasn't a very popular kid. And it was only my closest friends knew about me being transgender. It was very hard to try to change who I was because I was surrounded with people that had known me since I was 5 years old or whatever, since I was in kindergarten. The type of people that I associated with weren't very accepting people necessarily, and so a lot of them didn't understand either, and they didn't accept it. They just sort of stopped hanging around me. Around the summer of 8th grade, or the summer before 8th grade, I had something that I don't want to go into too much detail with, but someone who I was with, my boyfriend had passed away in a car accident. And it was very difficult to um, to come to terms with that, because um, that was the first sort of experience with loss that I had ever had. Um, and it made it very hard to stay. He was a bit older than me, and he had a license, and he loved to go places, and so everywhere that I went in around where I lived reminded me of him, and it was hard to be there and um, process his death. But the thing that finally changed my mind was my dad had started drinking more. Occasionally, when he would drink, he would get angry, and we would get into an argument. And I would have to call my grandmother, who lived a couple miles away, to come pick me up, and I would spend the night at her house. And there were times where I wouldn't talk to my dad for weeks, almost a month, and sometimes. And so I would our relationship was really almost non-existent. I wanted a fresh start. I wanted to move somewhere where I could be who I felt like I was, and I don't have to sort of fit the mold of what I used to be. I could completely reinvent myself, and that's what I did. I stopped using my name and started going by Ash, which is short for Ashlyn. I want to talk about the last question I have on this project. How do I think that as a society we'll remember this pandemic in the future? How will we explain this to future generations? And in addition to that, I want to talk about how it's affected me, how I see that it is affecting others, and what's changing. So it's interesting to see society sort of trying to figure this out in real time, because there's not any practice for this. This right now is the world in progress, and we can't stop that to make a collective decision. We just have to figure it out as we go, and I believe we're still figuring it out, and we don't have an answer yet. So in the future, I think this will be remembered as every generation has their defining event. I think this will be the defining event of my generation. The previous generation, it was 9/11. And being a young adult during that time and seeing that happen, and how do we pick up the pieces? That's sort of what this is for my generation, is we don't know what to do. We don't know how to fix this, and we're just kind of figuring it out as we go. But we all have to decide as a society, where are we going to go from here, and how are we going to fix this? How are we going to put everything back together after this is all done? And it's interesting to think about the different ways that could be done. So the final thing I want to talk about is, what can we learn from this pandemic? Despite all the things I've been saying about how this is similar to very difficult things in my life, and this has been very tough, being away from everybody, I think this is actually a lot we can learn from this, in terms of how fragile our society is when something like this is thrown out of balance, which really it's an easy solution. If everyone just stays home, they won't get sick, and eventually it will peter out. But you can't just stay home all the time. You have to go to the store, you have to go to work, you have to make money, and it's difficult to figure it out. So I think this is preparing us. We are learning the good things that we are doing, and the things that we're doing that are bad that we can avoid in the future if something like this were to happen again. I think that we need to look at this as a learning experience for what we should do in the future. And I think that could be the best way to turn this very negative thing into a positive. Um, I want to keep talking about different things, but this is going on a little long. Thank you for listening, and uh, thank you for um, helping me out through my entire high school career. Um, and I just wanted to say that I'm thinking about uh, a lot of you. I don't know who all is watching this, but I really do. I really do feel for you, and I understand that this is hard for you too. Um, so I want to say thank you for everything that you're doing, everything that you continue to do for future generations. Um, a lot of the time it goes underappreciated, but I think that it's a very important job, and I think it's one of the most noble things that someone can do is teaching future generations about uh, not just different things that we need to learn to function in the world and get jobs and stuff like that, but also uh, teaching them to be good people. I've learned a lot of that uh, from the way you the teachers and staff at Godly lead by example. I know that's something that's said a lot uh, around Godly, but um, since I've been reflecting, I've realized how important it is um, that we have that good example in our lives as people that are trying to figure out how the world works and what we're going to do. So thank you for everything that you do, and hopefully we will see each other soon.